the possession of efficient means for the processes of reciprocal destruction. The beings of both groups, whose places of existence were adjacent, often came in contact and had friendly relations with each other, with the result that little by little they picked up from each other those specialties which had first been invented by their ancestors and which had become proper to them. In other words, the result of the frequent contact of the beings of those two communities was that the Greek beings, borrowing from the Roman beings all the finesses of sexual turns, began arranging their what are called Athenian nights, while the Roman beings, having learned from the Greek beings how to cook up sciences, composed their later very famous what is called Roman law. A great deal of time had passed since then. The inventors of both those kinds of being manifestation have already long been destroyed, and their descendants who chance to become powerful have been destroyed also, and now the contemporary three-brained beings of that planet spend, even with emotion, more than half of their existence and being energy acquired somehow or other in absorbing and actualizing unconsciously and sometimes even consciously those two ideals, the initiators of whose arising were the said bored Asiatic fishermen and shepherds. Well then, my boy, later on, it seems, when both these groupings of your favorites acquired many of the said efficient means for the successful destruction of the existence of beings like themselves, and when they had become quite expert in persuading, or by potency of their means compelling beings of other countries to exchange their inner convictions for those ideals invented by their ancestors, then, as I have said, they first conquered the neighboring communities situated on the continent Europe, and afterwards, for the same purpose, with the help of the hordes they collected during that period, turned towards the continent Asia. And there already on the continent Asia they began spreading that maleficent influence of theirs, first among beings populating the western shores of that continent, in whom, as I've already said, being impulses for a more or less normal being existence had been implanted during centuries, and afterwards they gradually began advancing into the interior. This advance of theirs into the interior of the continent Asia proceeded very successfully, and their ranks were constantly being increased, chiefly because the learned beings who had been in Babylon then continued everywhere on the continent Asia to infect the reasons of beings with their Hasnamussian political ideas. And they were also helped very much by the fact that there were still preserved in the instincts of the Asiatic beings the results of the influences of the initiates and priests, disciples of the very saintly Ashiata Shiyamash, who in their preachings had inculcated, among other things, one of the chief commandments of Ashiata Shiyamash, which declared, "Do not kill another, even when your own life is in danger." Profiting by all this, these former fishermen and shepherds were very easily able to advance, destroying on the way all those who declined to worship the gods they themselves had finally acquired, that is to say, their fantastic science and their phenomenal depravity. At first, these sowers of evil, for all the three-brained beings there of all the succeeding generations arising on the continent Europe, and especially the Greeks, moving into the interior of the continent Asia, acted, if slowly, nevertheless effectively. But when some time later there appeared and stood at the head of what is called an army, that completely formed arch-vainglorious Greek, the future Hasnamus, Alexander of Macedonia, then from that time on there began to proceed that clean sweep of the last remnants of the results of the very saintly intentional labors of our now common cosmic most very saintly Agiata Shiamash. And again there was resumed, as it is said, the old story. Although every time the place of the center of culture of your favorites, those strange three-brained beings, has been changed, and what is called a new civilization has arisen, and each new civilization has brought for the beings of succeeding epochs something both new and maleficent. Nevertheless, not one of these numerous civilizations has ever prepared so much evil for the beings of later epochs, including, of course, the contemporary epoch, as that famous Greco-Roman civilization, without mentioning the large number of other minor psychic features unbecoming to be possessed by three-brained beings and now existing in the presences of your favorites. That civilization is mainly to blame for the complete disappearance from the presences of the three-brained beings of succeeding generations, and especially of the contemporary beings, of the possibility for crystallizing the data for sane, logical mentation, and for engendering the impulse of being self-shame. Namely, the ancient Greek fantastic sciences caused complete atrophy of the former, and the ancient Roman depravity of the latter. In the early period of that Greco-Roman civilization, the said maleficent impulses, which have now become being impulses, namely the passion for inventing fantastic sciences and the passion for depravity, were inherent in the Greek and Roman beings alone. And later, when, as I've already said, the beings of both these communities chanced to acquire the said strength, and began coming into contact with and influencing the beings of other communities, the beings of many other communities of your unfortunate favorites gradually began to be infected by these peculiar and unnatural being impulses. This took place on the one hand, as I have already said, owing to the constant influence of both these communities, and on the other hand, owing to that peculiarity of their psyche, common to all the three-brained beings of the planet, and already well fixed in it before this, which is called there imitation. And thus, little by little, these inventions of those two ancient communities have brought it about that already at the present time the psyche of your favorites, shaky enough already before then, has now become so unhinged in all of them without exception that both their world outlook and the whole ordering of their daily existence rest and proceed exclusively on the basis of those two said inventions of the beings of that Greco-Roman civilization, namely, on the basis of fantasizing and of striving for sexual gratification. Here it is very interesting to notice that although, as I've already told you, thanks to the inheritance from the ancient Romans, organic self-shame proper to three-brained beings has gradually and entirely disappeared from the presences of your favorites, nevertheless there has arisen in them in its place something rather like it. In the presences of your contemporary favorites, there is as much as you like of this pseudo-being impulse, which they also call shame, but the data for engendering it, just as of all others, are quite singular. This being impulse arises in their presences only when they do something which, under their abnormally established conditions of ordinary being existence, is not acceptable to be done before others.